Hey all, today we're going to be delving deep and uncovering whether Meet Kevin is really as legit as he appears, or whether there's some other forces at work. This video will be great for you if you're interested and follow Meet Kevin, but you're skeptical about how he made such a significant amount of money at such a young age. But before we get started, make sure you drop a like down below, and Kevin, if you're watching this, don't sue me bro. Now let's get into the video. So let's start out with a little backstory. Meet Kevin is currently a 28-year-old real estate agent with a wife and 2 kids. He owns around 12 properties worth over $8 million, which is absolutely nuts at 28 years old. Now I think it's important to remember that while the properties themselves are worth about $8 million, Meet Kevin obviously has mortgages against each of these properties. Therefore his net worth isn't $8 million, but it does seem that he's quite sensibly geared on these properties, with mortgages of around 50 to 60%. So probably about half of that is his actual net worth. A lot of investors actually gear themselves up much higher at 75%, 80 or 90% geared with only like a 10% down mortgage. I myself actually do gear myself up a little bit higher than Kevin. My first deal I purchased at 90% gearing with only a 10% down mortgage. But I suppose this is probably because I'm a bit younger, so I don't have as many risks, I don't have a wife and I don't have kids. And that's probably all I could afford at the time. So obviously if it doesn't go right and the property does end up making a loss, or I do end up losing money, I can just start again. So obviously I wouldn't really recommend gearing this high, and if you can, it's probably better to gear more sensibly like Kevin does, with a 50 or a 60% mortgage, especially during these times when it is quite uncertain what's going to happen to the property market. But if you are quite young and you do really want it, it's worth taking a risk. Kevin bought his first property at the age of 20 in Ventura, California, and this is actually where he's bought all of the rest of his properties as well. Similar to me, Kevin only likes to invest close by to where he lives. And I think that's really crucial because when you have like 12 properties, you want to make it quite easy to get from property to property. You don't want to have to be driving to different ends of the country just to get to your rental properties if they need a little bit of work to them. Now some of you might be asking, Tom, how on earth did Kevin buy his first property at the age of only 20 years old? And I do want to clarify, it's definitely possible to buy your first property at a young age. I bought my first property at the age of 23. If you focus on saving a good portion of each paycheck, say 50% plus, and you try and focus on earning a little bit more by picking up an extra job at the weekends, it's definitely possible to save up enough for your first deposit in only a few short years. Now you're probably not going to be able to save 50% of each paycheck if you want to move out at the age of 18, so you might have to make some of these sacrifices along the way. You might have to live at home for a few more years just for the cheaper rent so that you can save more. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's probably worth it if you can get on the property ladder quite early and continue building from there. Now, what makes Meet Kevin different from me and enabled him to buy a property even earlier than I did is because when I bought my first property, I bought it on my own. That means I had to have enough savings and have a high enough salary to afford the mortgage repayments on my own. Whereas Meet Kevin bought his first property with his now wife, Lauren. So that means they had 2-person savings and 2 people's mortgage affordability or salary. And that obviously makes a huge difference because obviously even if on your own you don't earn a whole lot, when you combine salaries together, it's a whole lot more. And I think Kevin even had a 3rd signature on his property as well. I think it was either his dad or Lauren's dad. So that meant they had 3 people's salary or mortgage affordability. Now this is why I would actually recommend that if you're young or you don't have a super high paying job, then you could invest with a partner or a relative or a very close friend. It might be a bit tricky if you get partway through the investment and you start disagreeing with things, such as you disagree on how you want the kitchen to look, or you disagree on the layout of the property. But obviously if you can agree things up front and work together as a team, it can be a great way to combine your salaries together to be able to afford a property in the first place, or afford an even bigger property. If you've enjoyed the video so far, be sure to drop a comment down below letting me know what you think about Meet Kevin. If you haven't watched him before, I'd urge you to give him a watch because he creates some really good content. So the second point we're going to look at is at what point in time Meet Kevin was actually buying most of his properties. And he actually bought a lot of his properties in 2012, 2013 and 2014, and quite recently. So obviously this is after the 2008 recession and after the 2011 blip. And obviously the property market in 2012 to 2014 was really flying. So he could capitalise on that appreciation and supercharge his portfolio and grow it a lot faster. Now obviously Kevin probably would have had a very different story if he invested in 2006 or 2007 and probably would have been really heavily burnt and potentially might not have grown to the point he is at today. So obviously I don't want to say got lucky, but did end up unconsciously timing the market very well. But I guess that also means that Meet Kevin hasn't really experienced a recession or a period of negative growth. So it'll be really interesting to see how he fares now that the Rona is going around. But obviously Kevin does seem that he's prepared quite well, as obviously he's only around 50 or 60% geared on his mortgages, instead of being really highly leveraged and at a really risky area of 90%. So I think next up, it would be good to look at how Meet Kevin managed to grow his portfolio so fast. And I think it boils down to a few different things really. Obviously he made good income as a real estate agent, especially as he went that extra mile to help renovate his clients' properties and their homes before they sold them to help them generate extra value. This was probably great for Meet Kevin because he probably managed to factor in some kind of additional remuneration for doing that additional help. And I think one point to really take away from this video is that actually going the extra mile in your job or your business can help you earn an extra bonus on top of your normal salary or your normal profits. And actually by doing that, it can help you grow your portfolio much faster. He was also buying his properties in a really great time, as we found out earlier, which allowed him to grow his portfolio faster because obviously he could capitalise on that appreciation in the market and in his properties by actually drawing out some of that appreciation or the additional money or wealth that it gained through either a refinance or a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit. And that obviously allowed him to draw some money out to go and buy another property. And obviously if he didn't actually have that appreciation, he probably wouldn't have been able to take out any additional money to buy more properties. He would have had to spend a few more years saving some money up to go and buy a property instead. So that's why I think it's really important to consider that actually, when a lot of successful investors grow their wealth very quickly, sometimes it can boil down to, again, I don't really want to say luck, and I also don't really want to say timing the market, because you can't ever really time the market, but more just kind of getting lucky, and when that market does appreciate, you can obviously take out that additional wealth. See, I don't really think it's worth trying to time the market, because no one really knows when some kind of market crash is going to happen. Like, no one really knew that this virus was obviously coming. And again, you also can't really know when a market is going to explode and boom. He also began making YouTube videos in 2017, but he didn't really explode until around 2018. And obviously this not only gave him a lot of YouTube money, but also allowed him to excel at his day job of being a real estate agent. A lot of his clients probably would have found him directly through his YouTube channel, and that means he managed to accelerate his everyday job and earn even more. His channel then started to really go crazy in 2019 and 2020, where he now gets hundreds of thousands of views every single day. And this basically helped him double his portfolio. Obviously, a lot of people can make crazy amounts of money from YouTube, and therefore they then look to store their money in property or stocks as a result. I suppose to an extent, anyone that gets a kind of crazy income from YouTube or any other kind of source of income, such as investment banking or running a successful property business, could start their own property investing portfolio. So it's not necessarily him getting these crazy deals where he's making thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of profit per deal. A good portion of it does come from him just having a very high income. And anyone that has that kind of crazy high income can build a portfolio. And that leads me quite nicely onto whether Kevin is actually buying good deals. And I guess it kind of depends what you classify as good or successful deals. Some people might only see a good deal as something that you've bought for X and sold for Y, and then you've made a profit. But obviously Meet Kevin doesn't really sell his properties. So some people might not really class Kevin's deals as being good. Because he hasn't sold them, he's kind of just guessing at what they're worth, because it's unrealised gains. Which I suppose is partially true, but obviously if he has had them valued externally by a bank or by an independent surveyor, or he's got those good comparatives, those values can be fairly reliable. And it's likely that he probably has had them externally valued so that he can get cheaper mortgages. So actually, while he hasn't realised his profits by selling yet, those profits are kind of reliable because obviously they've been independently valued. And I say fairly reliable because those independent valuations were probably performed a few months ago. And obviously at the moment, we're in very uncertain times and the market might or might not crash. Check out one of my other videos about whether the housing market is about to crash. Now obviously for it to be a good deal, you would want the properties to be cash flow positive each month as well, which is where the rent exceeds the mortgage and the repairs and any other vacancy and any other costs every month, which Kevin actually is doing at the moment. In one of his previous videos, he gives the rent figures and the mortgage figures for each of his properties and can see that it is positive. But I suppose it is partially due to him having a fairly small loan on each of his properties, because obviously he's only 60% geared instead of 90% geared. So if he was 90%, his mortgage payments would be a lot higher and he probably wouldn't be making cash flow every month. Kevin does also say that it's okay not to be cash flow positive, which I would kind of agree with and kind of disagree with. Obviously you're still going to benefit from the capital appreciation and the principal pay down of your mortgage, but obviously capital appreciation isn't really certain, and it would definitely be more ideal to be making cash flow from the rent each month. If you've made it this far in the video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, because I'm guessing that you're probably enjoying the video so far, and I make a lot of other videos just like this on my channel. And next up we're going to look at whether anyone can replicate this kind of success. And I think the short answer is that it depends, because there are a lot of things that fell in line for Kevin all at the right time. He invested in the market at a really great time. His YouTube channel also blew up, which gave him a huge second source of income. And his YouTube channel also helped him turbocharge his day job of being a real estate agent and increase that source of income as well. So obviously these things all kind of fell in line for him, allowing him to go from property number 1 to number 2 to 3 and so on. So obviously if you do have a very high earning job or a big source of income, it will definitely allow you to go from property number 1 to 2 and so on quite fast. But obviously if you just have an average job, then it is still doable, but it will probably take a lot longer, because obviously you won't just be able to go and buy a property and then go and buy another property a week later. You'll have to spend a few years maybe in between to save up enough for that next deposit. So I do think that a lot of Kevin's success doesn't stem from him buying these absolutely incredible deals. Don't get me wrong, I do think that he does buy fairly good deals, or good deals, because he buys similar to me, in the sense that he buys a property in need of refurbishment and refurbishes them because that generates him additional value, which is this gap between what he's paid and put in compared to what it's worth. But obviously I do think that a lot of it does come from him having a very good source of income so that he can buy multiple properties at the same time, or one after the other fairly quickly. But I do also want to do a bit of a Q&A on some of the points that have come up in other videos and give like my views on them. So some people might say that he's a failure because he hasn't sold any of his properties, which I think is a really narrow-minded way to look at it. Sure, he hasn't sold any of his properties, but obviously providing that he has those good comparatives and he's had it valued externally by a banker or surveyor, and not including any market drop from Corona, those properties are worth what he says they're worth. It's like saying Jeff Bezos is a failure because he hasn't sold Amazon, or Warren Buffett is a failure because he hasn't sold all of his stocks. No, they're probably the richest people in the world. Other people might say that if the market fell by 20 or 30%, that he'd be making a loss, which I think is probably a fair comment to make. But I imagine that most people out there that do invest in either property or stocks would probably lose a lot of money if the market did fall by 20 or 30%. Unless obviously they're trying to claim that they make 50 or 60% profit on a deal, and therefore their deal is still possible even with a 30% market drop, which I think is a bit crazy, and I'd probably be questioning the legitimacy of those deals if they're claiming 50 or 60% profit on a property flip, because those kind of numbers just don't really exist. As always, if you've enjoyed the video and want to learn more about property investing, then be sure to check out some of my other videos. Alternatively, subscribe to the channel and ding the notification bell. That way you'll be alerted when I upload a new video. Cheers.